We're now on to looking at chapters 17 through 20. At this point, we're moving from our first generation into our second, as we'll soon see. Chapter 17 has something in common with chapter 13. They both figure strongly on Isabella's voice. In chapter 13, we had a letter in which Nellie still held on to. We also know from that fact, that letter, that Nellie held on to it because she likes to keep remembrances of people who she cared about who have died. So we know at some point Isabella is going to die. But at this point, Isabella has escaped from Wuthering Heights. I want you to look at what she describes about what happens in this chapter, specifically the interaction, the violence that occurs between Heathcliff and Henley that she is involved in. Focus on her comment about revenge and also about how Henley is connected to Catherine. Look at those references to eyes again. Eyes are going to come up more and more frequently in the novel. When Isabella is talking to Nellie about Wuthering Heights, what sort of language, what sort of style does she use? Has her voice changed in some way? Does she sound like someone from Thrushcross Grange or someone from Wuthering Heights? What would be the difference between these two types of voices? So again, look at the diction, look at the word choice, especially in how she describes Wuthering Heights as a house and Heathcliff. Chapter 17 also focuses on Henley's death. Look at Nellie's reaction to Henley's death. This is a very poignant moment, and it's very specifically Nellie's own. It's her own story for a change. Think about what has happened in the ownership of Wuthering Heights. We see it made very clear in legal terms. And ask yourself, why is it that Hareton stays at Wuthering Heights? Why does he not go to Thrushcross Grange? There's a very specific reason. Look for it in the chapter. Compare how Hareton acts with the puppies versus how Heathcliff hung up Isabella's puppy when they were leaving the Thrushcross Grange and eloping. And then start thinking about nature versus nurture. Heathcliff puts up Hareton and says, "Now, my bonny lad, you are mine, and we will see if one tree won't grow as crooked as another with the same wind to twist it." Is Heathcliff going to be that same wind? We need to see this as we go through the novel. Again, look at Hareton and Heathcliff versus Heathcliff and Henley. Do we see similarities? Do we see differences? Chapter 18, between chapter 17 and chapter 18, 12 years pass because the kids are kids. They're not as interesting. And Nellie talks about these years as being the happiest of her life, and happy stuff is just not that interesting, so we don't really get a lot of it in the book. And so we pass these 12 idyllic years in which young Cathy Linton, is growing up in Thrushcross Grange. But she wants to know more than Thrushcross Grange. She says, "But I know the park and I don't know these. What does this show us about Cathy?" In this chapter, we're going to see a lot of description of Cathy. We're going to also see some description of Hareton and how they're growing up, what kind of person they're becoming. Also look and see how is Bronte, and actually Nellie through her voice, presenting this Cathy versus her mother Cathy. Is Bronte making the daughter more likable than the mother? If so, why? In what ways is she similar to her mother, and what ways is she different? Does she have any characteristics of Edgar? Remember, Edgar is the one who is raising her. Are they a happy father and daughter as opposed to Catherine with her father, Mr. Earnshaw? So again, think about the father-daughter relationship as well. Chapter 19, we get a letter edged with black. This is a Victorian convention and in Romantic convention as well, which signifies mourning, it signifies death. Isabella has died. She's about 31 now. And she's been living in London. She's been living in London with her son, who she named Linton. When, in an early chapter, Heathcliff hears that she's named her child Linton, he smiles at Nellie and says, "Oh, she really wants me to hate it." Does he hate his son? We shall see. So Kathy has met Hareton, and she becomes very upset with finding out that he's her cousin. Why is that? How is she interacting with him before she found out he was her cousin? When she sees Linton Heathcliff, she sees him as her real cousin. So what is it about Linton that's different from Hareton that makes her want to own him as a cousin? And will that ever change? In what ways does Bronte influence our first view of Linton? What do we think of him? Remember, he's about 12 years old. Kathy's a little bit older. Kathy Linton about 13. About this point, Hareton is already 18. He's the oldest of them. So this is where we're starting to get our second generation growing up. How do we think and how do we view Linton as we first see him? He comes first to Thrushcross Grange, but he doesn't stay there. Why is that? In chapter 20, we have Linton under Heathcliff's control. What is Heathcliff's sole consideration in interesting himself in the care and rearing of his son? Is he going to degrade this son, or is he going to elevate this son? We also get into these issues of nature and nurture. They're coming up now, they're going to come up in later chapters. Which young man has the better innate qualities, Hareton or Linton? Who is getting the better opportunities, Hareton or Linton? Take a look and see. A lot of this chapter is in dialogue, especially with Heathcliff and Nellie. And even before that, Mr. Linton, Edgar Linton, is having a discussion with his nephew as he goes off. What is the purpose of that? Why are we using dialogue to learn about this situation? And what's the result of that approach? I hope you enjoy these chapters, and I look forward to discussing them in class.